Raina Holt didn't remember the moment her parents died. Everyone in town remembered it for her. The fire in the tailor's house. The 2 small coffins under the cottonwood tree. The pastor whispering God's mercy while neighbors whispered, "Poor child." She was 8 then. By 17, mercy had dried up. No one had hit her. No one had thrown stones. They simply treated her like air. The easiest form of cruelty. A ghost that still managed to eat bread, take space in a room, and breathe other people's oxygen. She packed a single canvas satchel and walked out of the boarding house at dawn without saying goodbye. The wind carried dust and the smell of iron from the forge down the street. The town was yawning awake when the driver of the freight wagon spotted her standing in the cold. "Too early to run from your debts, girl," he muttered. Raina didn't run. She didn't steal. She simply stood there, coat thinner than frost, staring at the road like it was the only thing that might forgive her. Her feet ached. Her hands stung. Every step westward felt like a prayer. If you find this kind of story comforting, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more Western romance stories like this. Raina did not know where she was going. She walked because staying felt like drowning. Every alley, every storefront, every neighbor wore her dead parents like a layer of paint on their faces. She cut through the edge of town where the road widened and the ruts deepened. She passed the cottonwood tree where the coffins lay, shrinking like memories nobody wanted to remember. The morning was pale, cold, though spring had already begun on the calendar. Frost clung to fence posts. Crows hopped atop a sagging rail. A stray dog nosed a chicken carcass. Raina's breath came in short clouds as she walked, one hand on the satchel at her chest, as if the few belongings she carried could anchor her to the earth. She tried to imagine someplace else, someplace quiet, where no one remembered the little girl who watched her life burn. But imagination was a luxury she had never been allowed. Her boots rubbed blisters into her heels. Her shawl had holes in it. Her hunger was an old companion, just polite enough to let her walk in silence before it complained. By noon she stopped at a small creek, cupping icy water in her shaking hands and pressing it to her face. Tasted like metal. She drank anyway. She sat a long while. She listened to wind move through scrubgrass. She watched dust dance around her boots. Then she stood and continued west. The ranch lay 10 miles west of town, hidden behind a rise of prairie grass and post oak. Elias Ward had owned it longer than most folks could remember. A blacksmith-turned-rancher, he had strong arms, quiet eyes, and the kind of jaw that suggested he had seen a great deal of pain and learned to survive it. His forge still stood beside the main barn. He didn't work iron much anymore, only when a horse threw a shoe or a wheel came loose. Most days he oversaw the ranch hands, rode the south pasture fence, or took cattle into the markets. He lived in the ranch house with Martha Clay, a woman old enough to be everybody's aunt and tough enough to be nobody's fool. It was Martha who ruled the kitchen, chased dust from the floorboards, and kept the young stable hand from losing fingers to his own stupidity. Town people said Elias was quiet. They said it like an insult. They said men like him made poor conversation, poor husbands, and poorer company. But town people had never watched him tie a splint on a ranch hand's broken arm at midnight, or hold a horse's muzzle until the animal stopped trembling. Quiet was not an absence. Quiet was a kind of strength. Raina didn't see the ranch gate until she nearly walked into it. Her legs were shaking. Her lips were blue. Her stomach felt hollow. She leaned her forehead against the wooden post, eyes closed. Just a handful of seconds. Just long enough to remember how to breathe. She barely heard the hoofbeats, barely registered the crunch of saddle leather. When she opened her eyes, a bay mare stood before her, reins loose, breath steaming. The rider sat tall, coat dusty, hat pulled low, gloved hands loose around the pommel. He didn't say anything at first. He simply studied her the way a man studies a stray dog on his porch. Not unkind, but wary. When he did speak, his voice carried the weight of calm. "You'll freeze out here." Raina swallowed. "I'm fine." It was the lie she had used all her life. She delivered it like a reflex. The rider dismounted. Boots met soil. He set the reins over the mare's neck. "No," he said. "You're not." She meant to take a step away. Instead, her knees buckled. The man caught her with one arm as if it were the most obvious thing to do. He didn't lift her or cradle her or pry answers from her mouth. He simply steadied her. "Can you walk?" he asked. Raina could have lied again. She could have pretended toughness. But she was so tired of pretending. She nodded. He offered his arm. She hesitated. He didn't insist. The wind did that for him, biting sharp against her skin. She took it. They walked beneath the ranch gate. Martha Clay took one look at the half-frozen girl and didn't bother asking permission. She ushered Raina inside the kitchen, sat her near the stove, and wrapped her in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and lye soap. Only then did she address the cowboy. "What did you find?" "Another half-dead stray." Elias Ward removed his hat and set it near the door. "Found her by the gate," he said. "Couldn't tell how long she'd been walking." Martha planted hands on hips. "Lord above. Sit yourself, girl. I'll get stew. If you faint, try not to do it on the rug. I just beat the dust out of it yesterday." Raina tried to apologize. Martha waved it away. Stew arrived. Potatoes, beef. A broth that smelled like comfort had been simmered in it for years. Raina ate carefully at first, then hungrily. She didn't look up until the bowl was nearly empty. Elias was still leaning against the doorway, hat forgotten, studying her with quiet concern. He didn't ask about her past. He didn't demand her name. He simply waited until she met his eyes. "What do they call you?" he asked. Her voice cracked. "Raina Holt." Martha's expression softened the smallest degree. "Well, Raina Holt," she said. "You're foolish, but not the worst kind of foolish. Worst kind of foolish would have been turning down food." Elias spoke after a moment. "You can stay the night," he said. "Martha will see to the bed." Raina meant to refuse, to insist she would manage. Instead, the words that came out were, "Thank you." Raina didn't sleep at first. She lay beneath a quilt stitched long before she was born, staring at the ceiling beams in the dim lamplight. A low wind rattled against the shutters. The blankets held the warmth of the kitchen stove like a memory. Her bones felt strange, too warm, too still. It had been years since she'd slept in a bed that didn't shift with drafty boards or the weight of another orphan turning in their sleep. She listened to the house. Every home had a sound. The boarding house had sounded like coughing, like feet across echoing corridors, like muffled arguments about rent and food. The tailor's shop, when she was very young, had sounded like scissors biting fabric, her mother humming as pins clicked in a tin cup, her father tapping his needle against the spool. This house sounded different. A kettle settling in the kitchen, an ember sighing in the hearth, footsteps moving with purpose, not anger. She clutched the quilt tighter. Not a home, she reminded herself. Just a bed for one night. Just a kindness she would not abuse. She waited for sleep to claim her. Didn't. Her heart beat too loudly and the warmth frightened her, the way a starving dog fears a hand offering food. When dawn seeped beneath the curtains, she rose. Not because she was rested, because she could not bear the guilt of being asleep while someone else fed her. Martha Clay was already awake. Raina tried to move quietly, but the woman's hearing was sharp as a coyote's. "You think you're sneaking?" Martha called without turning. "You walk like a newborn colt. Grab that bowl of flour." Raina did as she was told. The kitchen smelled of yeast and wood smoke. Dough rested in 2 bowls by the stove, covered in cloth like sleeping children. Martha cracked eggs into a pan with a skill that looked like annoyance. "You're thin," she said. Raina flinched. "I work a lot." "That ain't what I asked. I said you're thin." "I suppose I am." "You suppose correctly." It wasn't kindness. It was fact. Somehow that felt safer. Martha handed her a knife. "Slice onions. Not too thick. If you cry, you'll salt the skillet for me." Raina cut. Her fingers were stiff, but the repetition soothed her. She only noticed her shoulders loosening when Martha nudged a cup toward her. "Drink the milk before it warms." Milk in the boarding house had always been gray and sour, reserved for the landlord's children. This was fresh, tasted alive. She drank slowly. Her stomach trembled as it accepted the gift. "Good," Martha said. "Maybe you'll stop looking like you're going to faint into the flour." Raina stared at the cutting board. "Martha," she murmured, "I don't want to be a burden." "Too late," the older woman replied, scraping onions into the pan. "Everyone's a burden. The difference is how much good you do to balance it." Raina didn't know what to say to that. She cut faster. Elias Ward entered the kitchen an hour later, boots dusted in frost. He nodded toward Raina, then toward the stove. No fanfare, no questions. He picked up a plate and waited until Martha put food on it. Raina watched him. Men in town had walked differently. They swaggered or stomped. They made noise when they entered a room, demanded to be fed, greeted, acknowledged. Elias entered like a river enters a valley. Inevitable, unassuming, steady. He ate slowly. When he finished, he set the plate in the basin and washed it without being asked. Raina blinked. Martha snorted. "Don't look so surprised. He's not a bore. He knows soap." Elias dried his hands. "You got someplace to go, Miss Holt?" The question was gentle, not prying. Raina swallowed. "West," she said. "I thought maybe there was work. Somewhere." "There's always somewhere," Elias replied. "But not much of its kind." He took his hat from the peg. "Martha and I will ride out to the north pasture. If you're hungry again at noon, eat. Don't wait for permission." He left. Raina felt like she'd just been handed an impossible luxury. By noon, she had swept the entire kitchen, scrubbed the basin, and carried fresh water from the pump. Not because anyone asked, but because the guilt sat like a stone in her chest. She could not eat without earning it. Now she sat at the table, staring at the stew pot like it might shame her for opening its lid. Her hands shook. Her stomach ached. Someone cleared their throat. Martha stood there, one eyebrow raised. "You waiting for the angels to come bless it?" Raina flinched. "Girl," Martha said, ladling stew into a bowl. "If you pass out before supper, I'm not dragging your carcass off the floor. Eat, then sweep the porch if it makes you feel saintly." Raina obeyed. Every bite brought tears she refused to cry. She ate until the ache in her gut softened into warmth. Raina scrubbed the porch until her knuckles cracked. She didn't stop when her back hurt. Didn't stop when wind bit her ears. Didn't stop when her fingers went numb. Work meant she wasn't stealing space. She was stooped over the steps when Elias returned at dusk. He dismounted and approached, brow slightly furrowed. "You plan on sanding the wood down to dust?" She straightened, breath ragged. "I'm only working yourself to death," he said. "There's no honor in it." She opened her mouth, guilt roaring up her throat. Elias placed a gloved hand on the railing. "Inside," he said. "Fire's going." His tone was final. Not a command, just truth. Raina hesitated. He turned to her. Not hard, not impatient, just steady. "You're shivering," he added. "Come inside." She followed. Inside the doorway, the warmth hit her so hard she nearly wept. Martha was stirring soup when they entered. She looked up, eyes sharp. "What did you do to yourself?" Raina stared at the floor. "Nothing. She scrubbed the porch raw," Elias said, removing his gloves. Martha clicked her tongue. "You ain't livestock," she muttered. "Sit before you keel over." Raina sat. The bowl in front of her steamed. The smell of carrots and broth and something like kindness filled the air. Martha didn't speak again. She just placed bread beside the bowl and walked away. It was Elias who lingered. He stood across from her, hat in his hand, eyes steady. "You don't owe us anything," he said. The words shattered something in her. A single tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away before anyone could see. But the man who had spent half his life forging steel noticed everything. He didn't comment. He didn't reach for her. He simply said, "You're safe here tonight," and walked out. The next days blurred into a routine. Raina woke before sunrise. She baked bread, carried water, helped Martha with laundry. She was careful not to take too much space. She sat straight-backed at meals and never asked for seconds. She worked until her muscles shook. Martha called her stubborn. Elias called her quiet. The ranch hands called her the girl who don't complain. That last one said more about their world than hers. Most of them had grown up with fathers who taught them to endure or be mocked. A girl who bled her fingers mending tack and never made a sound was almost holy. Sometimes they tried to talk to her. She only nodded. They stopped trying. Silence suited them. Elias watched her the way he watched horses in winter, for signs of strain, of hunger, of broken places that wouldn't heal on their own. He did not linger. He did not pry. But he noticed the way she tucked her hands behind her back when spoken to, the way she apologized when she hadn't been at fault, the way she worked until her vision blurred. He recognized the shape of her pain. He'd once carried it himself, years ago, after burying a wife who'd believed she was a disappointment because she never conceived. The world had taught them both the same lesson. If you cannot give something back, you do not deserve to stay. He had unlearned it slowly. Raina had yet to learn the opposite. One afternoon, Martha handed her a basket and pointed toward the barn. "Take this to Elias. And walk, child. Not run like you're outrunning death." Raina carried the basket across the yard. Sunlight lay warm across the pasture. Dust shimmered. The air smelled of hay and horses. Elias was working leather on a stall door. He looked up when she approached. "Delivery?" he asked. She nodded and held the basket out. He opened it. Bread, smoked pork, a slice of pie. "Pie," he muttered. "Martha's trying to bribe me into fixing her porch railing." Raina startled. "You don't like pie?" He raised a brow. "I like pie just fine. I don't like chores disguised as miracles." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. He noticed. Something eased in his expression. "Sit," he said quietly. She obeyed. He took out a slice, handed it to her before taking his own. It wasn't a grand gesture, just the unspoken belief that her hunger mattered as much as his. She ate slowly. He worked quietly. The air between them felt warmer than the sun. That night, Martha told Elias she was pleased. She laughed. "I heard it." "It wasn't a laugh," Raina protested. "Child, I've survived 5 husbands and 1 war. I know a laugh when I hear one." Elias said nothing. Raina pushed hair from her forehead. He said something funny." "That's how laughter works," Martha replied. "It escapes." Elias leaned against the table. "You don't have to earn every breath you take," he said. Raina looked at her hands. "That's how people treated me back home." "That's because people are fools," Martha said. "If they saw you bleed, they'd say you were wasting their water." Raina bit her lip. "It was easier when I was smaller," she murmured. "People pitied me then. And when you stopped being a child," Elias finished, "they expected you to disappear." Her eyes lifted in surprise. He understood. Not from guessing, from living. It happened on a Thursday. The wind came sharp from the north, rattling dry sage down the fence line. Elias and his foreman had ridden out early to check the winter feed sheds. Raina stayed behind to wash bedding in the yard, sleeves rolled up, fingers stiff and red from the cold water. She hummed without noticing. Some tune from childhood, a melody her mother used to hum while sewing hems. Martha paused on the porch, listened for a heartbeat, then disappeared inside with a smile she didn't comment on. Sunlight was pale, but honest, brightening the yard where gullies of snow refused to melt. 2 ranch hands came around the corner, boots crunching gravel. They didn't see her at first. She stood between 2 lines of sheets, hidden by white cloth flapping like sails. Their voices carried, unpolished as spurs. "I'm telling you, she's got Elias wrapped around her finger," said the older one, Rowan, the kind of man who believed being loud was a character trait. The younger one, Jonah, scoffed. "She barely speaks 5 words. Don't think she knows what a finger is good for besides sewing." Rowan spit into the dust. "Doesn't take words." Pretty little orphan thing shows up, all shaking and frostbitten. And suddenly Elias is warming up like it's the harvest dance. Raina froze. The sheet she was pinning fluttered wildly. She didn't stop it. Didn't breathe. Jonah laughed low. Man's a blacksmith. He works with heat. Give him something soft and he forgets what metal's for. Rowan grunted. You watch. He'll ruin his name over some stray girl that don't know her place. Martha's got to be losing her mind letting her stay. Folks in town are already talking. They turned the corner and walked on. They never looked back. Raina stayed there, fingers stiff around the wooden clothespin, breath trapped somewhere between ribs and throat. There was nothing new in their words, nothing she hadn't heard before, but hearing them here, on soil that fed her, in the air that warmed her, beside a house that dared to offer safety. It was different. It was worse. She didn't tell Martha, didn't tell Elias. She just stopped humming. That afternoon, she scrubbed the floors until her knees bled through her dress. Martha tried to scold her, but the girl only nodded, eyes lowered, voice soft as dust. Just trying to help. When Elias returned, mud splattered on his boots. He asked how the day had passed. Fine, she said. The lie was brittle. It did not bend, only threatened to shatter. He studied her a long moment. She wouldn't meet his eyes. He said nothing more. Over the next week, Raina became almost invisible. She rose earlier, worked later, ate less. She avoided the barn, avoided the porch, avoided wherever Elias might be. If she sensed his presence, she ducked into another room, or found a shed that needed sweeping. She existed on the ranch like a shadow that apologized for the light it blocked. Martha watched. Martha always watched. One morning she slammed a mixing bowl down so hard the flour jumped. Girl, she barked. Sit. Raina sat. What's crawled under your skin? Nothing, she whispered. Try again. Raina kept her eyes on her lap. You've both done too much for me. I shouldn't take so much space. Martha stared. Then she laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Oh heavens, not this again. Raina blinked. You think kindness is a ledger? Martha asked. You think we're keeping score, waiting to throw you out when the numbers don't balance? I think, Raina swallowed, I think it's easier if I don't expect anything. Martha's voice softened, but only slightly. You're expecting something every time you flinch like someone's about to hit you. Raina's throat closed. She looked at the floor. Martha reached across the table and tapped her chin with a finger. Lift your head. Shame doesn't belong there. Footsteps sounded behind them. Elias entered. Martha did not look away from Raina. You can run all you like, she said. But you're the one doing the chasing, not us. Elias found her later in the barn, trying to shoe a nervous young gelding by herself. The horse kicked and nearly caught her wrist. He stepped in instantly, steady and calm. Whoa, easy. He doesn't know you. Raina muttered an apology and backed away. I just thought I'd try to help. You don't help horses by bleeding for them, Elias said. His tone was not angry, just firm. Tools, patience, guidance, not sacrifice. He checked the horse's hoof, then glanced at her. Why are you avoiding me? Her breath caught. I'm not. You are. He set the hoof down gently and turned to face her fully. Someone said something? His eyes were quiet. Not sharp, not accusatory. Just open. Raina shook her head. Her hair slipped loose from its braid. No. He didn't argue. He just waited. And waiting was worse. It doesn't matter, she whispered. You've been a very kind. I'm grateful. I'll stay until spring if you need work done. And then, stop. She froze. Work isn't why you're here. She flinched. Then why am I here? He could have said mercy, charity, pity. He didn't. You needed somewhere to land, he replied. I had ground to spare. Her eyes burned. I don't belong anywhere, she said, voice cracking. Everywhere I go, I'm extra. Problem to be fixed. A reminder of something that burned down long ago. Elias took off his hat slowly, as if the motion itself deserved ceremony. He stepped closer, not looming, not demanding, just steady as an anvil. "Well," he said, voice low as dusk settling over the hills. "Then you belong with me." Raina forgot to breathe. He held his hat against his chest, eyes warm and certain. "This ranch has space," he murmured. "This house has room. And he swallowed, words slow and deliberate. "I have been lonely a long time." She shook her head. "I'm not worth ruining your name." "My name isn't made of glass," he said. "And if a man's pride breaks because he offered someone shelter, it was brittle from the start." The barn was quiet. Dust motes drifted like fireflies caught in sunbeams. Raina felt the ground shift beneath her, the way it did when a wagon will sank into soft soil. Except this time there was no crash, just the unfamiliar sensation of someone catching her before she fell. She didn't answer him that day. She couldn't. Instead, she walked out of the barn, heart thudding against her ribs like a trapped sparrow. She did not cry, not because she wasn't broken, but because the tears were too heavy to lift. In her small bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed, quilt bunched around her. Her hands trembled. "You belong with me." The words rang through her mind like church bells. Not romantic, not dramatic, just real. And that made them terrifying. She pressed her palms together and whispered into the quiet, "I don't know how to belong." The room did not answer, but the house, solid and steady, seemed to breathe around her, not shrinking, not pushing her out, just waiting. The days that followed moved with a strange, uneven rhythm. On the surface, nothing changed. Raina still swept the porch at dawn, watching pink light creep over the hills. She still helped Martha with dough and washing and mending. She still fed scraps to the barn cats and refilled the water bucket by the pump. But inside, something had shifted. Once, the ranch had felt like a place she was borrowing. After Elias's words in the barn, it felt dangerously close to becoming hers. That was the trouble. Belonging had teeth. If she let herself lean even a little into the idea that she had a place at this table, this hearth, this stretch of land, then losing it later would split her clean through. She worked harder, as if effort might justify existence. Martha noticed how the girl's hands grew more calloused, how her shoulders stayed tight even when the day was done. Elias noticed how her laughter, rare but bright, came less often. How she left rooms when he entered them, not sharply, just a heartbeat sooner than politeness required. Neither could quite find the shape of what was wrong. The shape came looking for her on its own. The confrontation came on a wind-scrubbed afternoon when the sky was so clear it made the world look unfinished. Raina had gone out to the corral to shake dust from the blankets and hang them to air. The sun had some warmth in it for the first time in weeks. A few tough blades of winter grass showed along the fence line. She closed her eyes for a moment, face tilted up, stealing what heat she could. Bootsteps scuffed behind her. She turned. Rowan and Jonah, same two hands who'd walked past the laundry line days before, stood by the fence. The older man had a rope in his hand he clearly wasn't using. The younger shifted his weight as if he'd rather be elsewhere but hadn't found an excuse. "Afternoon," Raina said, keeping her voice calm. She reached for another blanket. Rowan leaned one forearm against a post. "Afternoon, Miss Holt." He said her name in a way that put distance between the syllables. She gave a small nod and focused on the knot in the rope she'd tied earlier. Rowan cleared his throat. "Figure we ought to speak plain," he said. "Seeing as how plain's all some folks respect." Raina's stomach tightened. She kept her eyes on the blanket, smoothing an imagined crease. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied. "Oh, you're sure," Rowan said. "You're not stupid. Just acting like you don't know how things look." Jonah shifted his weight again, glancing back toward the barn where no one else was visible. Raina folded the corner of the blanket with careful precision. "How things look," she repeated. Rowan made a small, impatient sound. "You show up from nowhere. Trail dust and tragedy fine," he said. "We've all seen hard luck. Man gives you bed and bread for a bit. Folks might call it charity. Might even call it Christian." He tilted his chin toward the house. "But months now. You're still here. Elias taking you into town, buying you boots, books, what have you. You walking beside him like you're something more than a stray he pulled from the ditch. The words landed like stones. She could feel the bruises forming under her ribs. I earn my keep, she said quietly. I work. Doesn't matter how much you scrub floors. Rowan cut in. Town's already got its story. Orphan girl and widower blacksmith. Out under the same roof. No ring between 'em. Men talk. Women talk more. Some of 'em like the story. Some of 'em don't. Jonah finally spoke, voice low. Rowan. No use whispering what's shouted in town, Rowan snapped. Someone's got to tell her. He looked back at Raina. You may not care what they say about you, he went on. Or maybe you do, but you ought to care what they're saying about him. Man's got a name built over years of work, not charity cases and heartsick notions. Raina's mouth went dry. What are they saying? She asked, though some part of her already knew. Rowan shrugged, as if the words weren't heavy, as if he didn't choose them like knives. That he's paying too much attention, he said. That he's not thinking straight. That he's letting some girl's big, sad eyes cost him standing with men who've known him 20 years. There's talk he passed on a fair offer from Tomlinson to take you into town, set you up respectable with his sister's crowd, because he wanted you out here instead. Folks wonder why. Raina's vision blurred at the edges. I didn't know about any offer, she said. Her voice had gone thin. Of course you didn't, Rowan said. Man's decent. He keeps his wrestling to himself. But the rest of us got to live on this land too. When one man's name goes down, it drags the rest with it. Jonah looked at her then, and there was something like apology in his eyes. He's a good man, Miss Holt, he said softly. You're not doing him any favors by staying. Rowan straightened, dusted his hands as if he'd finished a chore. That's all, he said. We'll keep our mouths shut around him. But you needed to hear it from someone who doesn't fuss over quilts and tea. They walked away without waiting for an answer. The wind filled the space they left. Raina's hands kept moving, tying the blanket to the line by feel alone. The knot came out messy, but it held. Her chest did not. That night she hardly slept. Every creak in the boards sounded like accusation. Every murmur of voices from the kitchen reminded her she was under a roof she hadn't paid for, breathing air that carried someone else's hard-won warmth. Martha knocked once and let herself in, carrying a folded shawl she said she'd mended. Raina thanked her. Martha studied her face and didn't ask the question she wanted to ask. You're not a ghost, the older woman said instead. So stop walking like one. When the door closed, Raina pressed her fist against her mouth to hold the sound in. Before dawn, she rose. The house was still breathing slow. She dressed in silence, choosing the oldest of the 2 serviceable dresses Elias had helped buy in town. She folded the newer one and left it on the bed, smoothing the fabric as if to erase the impression of her hands. From the small drawer where she kept her things, she took the narrow ribbon that had once belonged to her mother. She wrapped it around her wrist twice and tied it off. No satchel this time. She had learned that dragging a life behind you only made it harder to move. In the kitchen, she paused. The stove still held a faint warmth from the banked coals. On the table sat the ledger Elias had been working over the previous night, his pencil tucked inside, page marked where he'd left off. She resisted the urge to close it, to neaten the edges of paper, to leave no sign she'd seen the numbers that carried so much of his worry. On a scrap of clean paper near the flour bin, she wrote 2 lines. Thank you for everything. I'm sorry for the trouble. Her hand shook, blotting the ink. She left it anyway. She didn't look at Martha's rocker. Didn't look at the mug that had become hers by habit. At the door, she hesitated. If she turned back now, if she climbed the stairs, woke Martha, said I'm scared, maybe things could still bend, not break. But Rowan's words echoed too loud. You're not doing him any favors by staying. She opened the door and stepped into the pre-dawn chill. The sky was just beginning to pale at the edges, blue leaking into black. The air bit at her cheeks, but she'd known colder. She walked down the path that led away from the house, past the hitching rail, past the corral where the horses dozed with one hind hoof cocked, heads low. She did not take a horse. You didn't pay back kindness by stealing its legs. She took the road instead, boots crunching on frost-hardened dirt, arms wrapped around herself. Behind her, the house grew smaller with every step. She did not look back until it vanished behind a rise. When she finally turned, there was only sky and a thin thread of chimney smoke in the distance, already unraveling. She faced west, where the road ran straight for a while before bending around a low hill. Town lay east. She went the other way. Running away, she told herself, was just walking forward in a direction nobody approved of. Elias woke to the smell of coffee and the knowledge that something was off. It was a small thing at first. No humming under her breath. No light tread across the floorboards overhead. He dressed and went downstairs. Martha stood at the stove, back straight, shoulders stiff. "Morning," he said. She responded without turning. "Coffee's on the table." He poured himself a cup, more for something to do with his hands than for thirst. "Raina sleeping late?" he asked. Martha's stirring slowed. "She's not upstairs," the older woman said. "Bed's made. Bed's cold." The space between Elias's ribs tightened. "Maybe she went to the barn early," he said. "Without boots." Martha nodded toward the back door. Near the mat, the girls' boots sat lined up neatly, laces tucked in as if awaiting their owner. A folded dress lay on the chair near the hearth, the newer one he'd quietly bought after noticing how thin her clothes had become. On the table, something white caught his eye. He picked up the note. The words were few. They might as well have been a full confession. "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry for the trouble." He exhaled slowly, the sound close to a quiet curse. "Rowan," he said. Martha frowned. "What about him?" Elias folded the note once, twice. "He and Jonah have been looking sideways at her for days," he said. "Men talk loud when they think the laundry's not listening." Martha's expression darkened. "If they put nonsense in that girl's head, I'll tan them myself," she muttered. Elias set the note down carefully, as if its thin paper might shatter. "Which way would she go?" he asked. Martha thought a moment. "Not back to town," she said. "Too many eyes there. Too many names she already knows for herself. If I had to guess." She nodded toward the open country beyond the back fence. She'd pick the road no one's claimed. Elias grabbed his coat. He saddled his bay faster than was comfortable for either of them, but the horse knew the urgency in his hands and held still. Martha met him at the hitching rail with a bundle, a canteen, a heel of bread, a small jar of boiled coffee. "You're not riding blind," she said, shoving it into his hands. "Girl can cover ground when she's scared. Don't ride past her." He mounted, gathered the reins. Martha put a hand on his boot. "You find her," she said. "You tell her the truth where she can't run from the words in the next room." He nodded once, jaw set. He rode out following the road she'd taken. Tracks were easy to see in the early light. Small boot prints, hurried but not panicked. The kind of walk a person took when they'd already decided the pain of leaving was easier than the fear of staying. Elias kept the bay at a ground-covering lope, eyes on the ground more than the horizon. The land unrolled around him. Low hills brushed with sage, dry creek beds waiting for spring melt, the occasional cottonwood lifting bare arms to the sky. He passed the turnoff that led to town. Her prints did not bend that way. He rode further, past the old trail that dropped toward the river, past the solitary boulder locals used as a landmark when they'd had enough whiskey to talk philosophy. The prints wandered once, as if she'd hesitated, then continued, straighter than before. She was not lost. She was choosing. Near midday, a familiar shape rose ahead, broken boards, a half-collapsed frame, the charred remnants of a small homestead that had burned years earlier, victim of a dry thunderstorm and bad luck. Folks in town rarely came this way if they could help it. Elias slowed the bay as he approached. The prince led straight toward the ruin. He reined in at a distance and dismounted, letting the horse crop at a patch of stubborn grass. Smoke hadn't touched this place in a long time, but ash seemed to hang in the air anyway. Raina sat on the remains of the front step, arms wrapped around her knees, chin tucked down. Her coat did little against the wind. Hair had blown loose from her braid, strands whipping across her face. She did not start when he approached. If she'd heard him coming, she hadn't moved. He walked slowly, boots scuffing soft, hands loose at his sides. He stopped a few paces away. "You picked a bleak place to decide your future," he said quietly. Her shoulders flinched, just once. "This was the first house that burned after my parents," she replied, voice flat. "Seems fitting." The words cut at him more than he let show. He took off his hat, more from habit than design, let the wind cool the sweat at his hairline. "You left your boots," he said. "Not the best plan for walking away." Her lips twitched. "I didn't want to take more than I already had." He looked at her, really looked, at the smudges under her eyes, the cracked skin on her hands, the way she held herself like a person who expected blows from every side and had no practice in dodging kindness. "You took nothing that wasn't offered," he said. She gave a small, broken laugh. "That's not what people say." The wind pulled the sound apart. He lowered himself to sit on a chunk of fallen beam near her, leaving space between them wide enough to respect, narrow enough to share the same piece of sky. "People say a lot of things," he replied. "Some of them true, some of them loud." Her fingers tightened on the fabric of her skirt. "Rowan told me," she said. "He told me what they're saying in town, that I'm hurting your name, that you're not thinking straight, that keeping me there is costly." She swallowed hard. "I told myself I wouldn't do that to anyone again. I told myself I wouldn't be the reason anyone suffered." Elias turned the hat in his hands, thumb circling the band. "You think my suffering is measured in what those men say at the saloon?" he asked. She stared at the blackened doorway. "I think your suffering is measured in how much you've already lost," she whispered. "Your wife, your quiet, your place. You took me in because you're kind. But I can't be the reason people stop trusting you." He listened, letting the words empty out. When she finally fell silent, he spoke. "Raina," he said, "look at me." She hesitated, then turned her head. Her eyes were wet, but the tears hadn't fallen yet. They hovered, the way rain clouds sometimes hang over a ridge without choosing whether to break. "I don't belong anywhere," she said. The words came out raw. "Every place I land, I become the problem people whisper about. The boarding house, the tailor's relatives, the town, now your ranch. I am tired of being the rock in other people's boots." Her voice cracked on the last word. She drew a shaky breath, and it came out like a sob she was fighting too hard to hide. "I don't belong anywhere," she repeated, quieter this time, as if testing the sound of it against the ruins around them. Elias watched her for a long moment. Then he set his hat in his lap, exhaled once, and spoke in the same tone he used when calming a spooked horse, a tone that knew the value of steadiness. "Well," he said softly, "you belong with me." The wind hushed, or maybe that was just how it felt. She blinked, as if she hadn't heard right. "What?" she whispered. He didn't raise his voice. "You belong with me," he said again. "Not because you owe me work. Not because I pity you. Not because I need someone to fill unused rooms or mend worn shirts. Because when you're in that house, it feels like someone's turned the lamps up a notch. Because Martha's laugh lands easier. Because my days have a shape they didn't before you came." He paused, thumb tracing the edge of the brim. "Because I don't want to ride back to that ranch knowing you're out here trying to disappear so nobody gets burdened by your breathing." Her eyes overflowed then, tears sliding hot and uninvited. "You say that now," she managed. "But when talk gets worse." "Talk will get worse," he said simply. "That's what talk does. It eats whatever you feed it. We can starve it or we can let it gnaw on us. Either way, someone's chewing. I'd rather it be busy on the outside while we build something solid on the inside." She shook her head, voice hoarse. "I'm just an orphan girl with a burned-out past. And I'm just a blacksmith who learned late to say the right things," he replied. "Together, we're two people who survived more than we thought we would. That counts for something." He turned the hat between his hands once more, then set it down beside him on the beam. His now empty hands rested on his knees, open, a quiet offer. "I can't promise you we won't be talked about," he said. "I can't promise you everyone will be kind. I can promise something else." She waited. He spoke slowly, each word weighed. "I won't be ashamed of you," he said. "Not in town. Not at table. Not at church. Not in front of those men who think they've got a say in my choices because we share dust on our boots." The words startled something inside her she'd kept pressed flat. "Why?" she asked. It was almost a challenge. "I bring nothing. You bring yourself," he cut in gently. "You bring the way you set an extra plate just in case. The way you talk to those barn cats like they're worth listening to. The way you learned the pattern of our days faster than any hired hand. The way you look at that house like it scares you and you're still brave enough to walk inside." His voice dipped. "You bring me company I didn't know how to ask for." Silence stretched between them, filled with an ache that wasn't entirely pain. Raina looked from the ruined doorway to his face. "This place burned," she said, nodding toward the charred beams. "Families lived here once. They thought it was permanent. Now it's just—" She gestured at the ruins. "Proof that nothing lasts," he said. She nodded. He tilted his head. "Or proof that even when something burns, the ground is still there," he said. "Still waiting. Still able to hold new foundations, if anyone's stubborn enough to try again." She stared at him, the meaning seeping in slowly like warmth into cold fingers. "I'm afraid," she admitted. The words were thin as thread. "Afraid to hope. Afraid to want. Afraid to stay long enough to be left." He nodded once. "I'm afraid too," he said. "Afraid to trust that God would send me one more person to care about when I already buried one. Afraid I'll fail you. Afraid I won't know how to be what you need." She frowned slightly. "Then why?" she asked. "Are you asking me to come back?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Because fear isn't the only thing that tells the truth," he said. "Some things you choose even while you're scared. You were scared when you got on my horse that night, but you still climbed up." A faint, unwilling smile tugged at her mouth. "I was half frozen," she said. "And half brave," he replied. He shifted, turning so he could look at her straight on. "I'm not asking you to move back into the house and pretend nothing hurt," he said. "I'm asking you to come back and let the hurting be something we work through under the same roof instead of at opposite ends of the county." Her breath shook in and out. "I don't know how to belong," she whispered again, as if the repetition might change the meaning. He leaned forward a little, elbows on his knees, hands hanging loose. "You belong by learning it one small thing at a time," he said. "First day, you sit at the table even if you feel you don't deserve the chair. Next day, you leave your shawl on the hook without apologizing for the space it takes. Day after that, you argue with Martha over how much salt belongs in stew and don't flinch when we both laugh." He shrugged. "Belonging isn't a gift someone hands you wrapped in ribbon," he added. "It's a decision both sides keep making." Tears slid freely down her cheeks now, tracking through wind-chilled skin. "What if I say yes?" she asked. "And I can't do it? What if I break something you're trying to rebuild?" His answer was quiet. "Then we patch it," he said. "Like we've patched fences and shoes and hearts before. I don't expect you to come back perfect. I don't want you grateful and small and tiptoeing like a guest. I want you honest, even when it's messy." He reached down, picked up his hat, and turned it once more between his fingers. "I came to bring you home," he said. "Not because you owe me, because I want you there." The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint smell of distant smoke from his own chimney, the sound of some bird calling from the cottonwood by the dry creek. Raina's shoulders sagged under the weight of everything unsaid. "I am so tired," she breathed. "I know," he replied. "I don't trust myself," she admitted. "Trust me," he said. She studied him. His face was not young, not untouched by grief. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that pain had etched there and work had deepened. His hands were nicked and scarred. His clothes smelled of iron and horse and that particular clean sweat of labor. A man who had carried his own losses and still had room to offer for someone else's. She thought of the boarding house. The way they'd shut doors more quietly when she walked past. Not out of kindness, but to make sure she heard nothing overt. She thought of the church pew where she sat alone, of the way people looked through her as if she were made of glass. She thought of Martha's steady push and Elias's steady calm. Of the way the ranch had begun, slowly, to feel like something more than borrowed. The words came out before she could decide whether they were wise. "If I come back," she said. "I don't want to be a ghost." He smiled, small and real. "Then don't," he said. "Come back as yourself. Take up room. Use your own chair. Hang your own shawl. Let folks see you. If they've got a problem with it, they can come knock on my door and spell it out. They won't." She looked down at her hands. "I'm afraid I'll need reminding," she said. He rose then, slowly, joints protesting the hours in the saddle, and held out his hand. Not grabbing, not insisting. Just offering. "I'm a stubborn man," he said. "I can remind you more than once." She stared at his hand. At Ash House, at her parents' funeral, at the boarding rooms, every offer she'd ever known had come with an invisible ledger attached. This one came with nothing but an open palm and a man who had ridden out into the wide country rather than let her vanish quietly. Her fingers twitched. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. His grip closed warm and steady around hers. He pulled her gently to her feet. When she swayed, he didn't rush to fold her against him. He just stood close enough that, if she stumbled, she'd hit something solid. "I don't belong anywhere," she said again. But this time it sounded more like a confession of habit than a truth. He lifted his hat and settled it back on his head. A small ceremony of completion. "Well," he murmured, eyes holding hers. "You belong with me." The words didn't fix everything. They didn't erase the fire that had taken her parents or the whispers that had followed her through town. They didn't silence the saloon or soften every hard face she'd ever met. But they did something else. They gave her a place to start. They rode back slower than he'd come, more for her sake than the horses. Elias let Raina sit in front of him this time, his arms a quiet barrier on either side as he held the reins. The bay's gait was even the kind of movement that could lull a nervous heart into something like rest. As they crested the hill, the ranch came into view. Raina's breath hitched. From this distance, the main house, barn, and outbuildings looked small, almost toy-like. Smoke curled from the chimney. Light flashed off a window. "That looks like belonging," Elias said quietly, almost to himself. She wasn't sure if he meant for her to hear it. Martha stood on the porch when they rode in, hands on hips, apron tied in a fiercer knot than usual. She didn't run to them, didn't shout, didn't cry. She just waited. Elias dismounted first, then helped Raina down, hands steady at her waist for a moment before letting go. Martha's gaze flicked over the girl's face, taking in the red-rimmed eyes, the set of her shoulders. "You're back," she said. Raina swallowed. "If you'll have me," she replied. Martha snorted, a sound full of relief and reprimand both. "Next time you feel like wandering off, at least have the sense to wear your boots," she said. "And leave a note that says where. I can't chase after you if you're hell-bent on dramatics." Raina choked on something that was half laugh, half sob. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Martha stepped forward then, wrapping her in a hug that was quick but fierce, like someone testing to see if fragile china had made the journey in one piece. "You're late for supper," she muttered. "That's the only thing I'm accepting apologies for. The rest we'll sort as we go." When she pulled back, she flicked her apron at Elias. "And you," she said, "don't you dare let those men stay on if they think their job description includes deciding who belongs under this roof." Elias nodded. "Already decided on that," he said. "We'll be talking later." Raina looked between them, heart full and aching. "You know what they said?" she asked Martha. "I don't need their exact words," Martha replied. "I know the type. I knew it the first day one of them called me just the housekeeper, like I didn't keep him fed and alive." She turned to Raina again, eyes sharp. "You belong here as much as I do," she said. "And I've been here long enough to outstare any fool who says otherwise." The certainty in her tone settled something in Raina's chest that had been rattling loose for years. Life did not suddenly smooth out. The next time they went to town, Raina still felt eyes on her back. But something had shifted. She did not trail 3 steps behind Elias like a servant. She walked beside him, hands folded in front of her, chin not quite so tucked. He spoke to people as he always had, quiet, respectful. But when conversation turned sideways, when someone's glance flicked between him and Raina a moment too long, he didn't look away. He met their eyes. If anyone was shamed by what they saw there, it was not him. Martha, for her part, made no effort to soften the story. At church, when a woman asked, with smile too sharp, whether their little orphan guest was moving on soon, Martha replied without pause. "She's family," she said. "So I expect she'll move on right about the time someone builds a better home and invites all of us to it." Raina stood beside her, cheeks burning. But for once the heat felt more like being near a stove than standing too close to a fire. At the ranch, things settled into a deeper rhythm. Raina argued with Martha about stew and stitching, and sometimes she won. She teased Elias once about his terrible singing when she found him humming while shoeing a horse, and he took the blow with mock injury that made them both laugh. On windy nights when old fears stirred, she still woke in a sweat. But now, when she sat up in bed, the darkness didn't feel as empty. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear Martha's soft snore, the creak of the house settling, the faint clang of something in the forge where Elias had forgotten to stack tools neatly. Sounds of life that counted her in, not out. Weeks turned to months. Spring crept over the land, subtle at first, then all at once. Grass greening, calves bawling in pastures, wildflowers staking tiny claims along the ditch banks. One evening, after a long day of mending harness and checking fences, the 3 of them sat on the porch. The sky burned with colors that made the world look briefly kinder, rose and gold and something between. Martha brought out coffee and, after a moment's thought, a small plate of cookies she claimed had come out too hard for company. "You two'll eat anything," she said. "No use wasting sugar on strangers." Elias sat on the top step, legs stretched out, mug cradled in his hands. Raina sat in the chair Martha insisted was hers now, a plain wooden thing with a cushion Martha had stuffed and stitched herself. They watched the sun go down without rush. After a time, Martha rose. "I'll see about the bread for tomorrow," she said. "You 2 can sit out here and stare like you're fixing to memorize the sky." She went inside, leaving the door open, the sounds of the house humming behind her. Silence settled between Raina and Elias, comfortable as a worn quilt. After a while, Raina spoke. "You shouldn't have had to ride out after me," she said. "I was foolish." He looked over at her, then back at the horizon. "Maybe," he said, "but you weren't alone in the foolishness." She frowned. "How do you mean?" He sipped his coffee. "I let other people's voices get too close to your ears before I put my own there," he said. "Should have said sooner what I meant. A man who leaves a girl guessing about her place has some blame when she guesses wrong." She considered that. "Rowan and Jonah," she began. "Are gone," he said simply. "Took their pay and their talk to some other outfit that has more use for their opinions." She blinked. "You let them go? Over me?" He finally looked at her, brows lifted. "I let them go over them," he said. "They thought they had the right to decide the worth of my choices in my own yard. That's not a thing I hire for. You were just the place where it showed first." She stared at her hands. "You keep doing this," she murmured. "Taking my side." "It's not sides," he replied. "It's truth. You were never the problem they were trying to fix." The words settled into her, slow and deep. She breathed them in. "I still don't always feel like I belong," she admitted. "Some days I walk through this house and think if I touch something it'll vanish. Or someone will come in with a paper and say it was all a mistake." He nodded. "Those days come for me too," he said. "Different shapes, same fear." She glanced at him. "For you." He tilted his head. "I walk past the forge some mornings and half expect to see my first wife step out with my breakfast," he said. "Then I remember she won't, and for a minute the world feels thin, like I could put my hand through it by accident." He shrugged. Then I hear you yelling at the rooster to shut up, or I hear Martha fussing about my boots on the mat, and the world thickens again. Gets heavy enough to stand on. Raina smiled, small and real. Words are heavy, she said. They are, he agreed. That's why I try to pick them, so they land in the right place. He turned his mug in his hands. When I told you you belonged with me, he added, that wasn't just something to bring you off a burned-out doorstep. It's a thing I meant for the long haul. She looked at him then, really looked. Saw not just the man who'd ridden out to find her, but the one who had stayed, day after ordinary day, keeping his promise in 100 small ways. Then I'll keep learning how to belong, she said softly. If you'll keep reminding me when I forget. He smiled. I'm stubborn, he said again. I can repeat myself. She laughed, and this time the sound came without breaking. Years later, people in town would tell the story differently. Some would say they'd always known that orphan girl would find a home. Some would say they'd seen the way the blacksmith looked at her from the first day and knew how it would end. Some would forget how sharp their tongues had once been and soften their remembering. But those who knew better, those who'd watched the quiet changes instead of just the milestones, would tell it plain. They'd say a girl who'd lost everything learned to lay her head down in a house that didn't threaten to disappear overnight. They'd say a man whose hands had only ever known iron and leather learned how to hold something as breakable as trust without crushing it. They'd say Martha had gotten exactly what she always wanted. A house not too quiet, filled with people who came to the table because they wanted to be there, not because they had nowhere else to go. On certain evenings, when the light slanted just right through the front windows, Raina would pause in the doorway and look out at the yard. She'd see a horse cropping near the fence, a pair of barn cats curled on the porch rail, Martha snapping peas in a bowl, Elias washing his hands at the pump. She still had days when shadows pressed close, when old fears rose up, loud and insistent. On those days, she'd find him, sometimes in the barn, sometimes in the forge, sometimes just walking the fence line, making sure nothing had broken in the night. She'd stand beside him, heart in her throat, the words clumsy but honest. I feel like I don't belong today, she'd say. And he, without fail, would take off his hat, hold it against his chest, and look her in the eye like there was nothing truer in his world than whatever she was saying. Well, he'd answer, with the calm of a man who'd hammered enough metal to know what held under strain. You belong with me. Every time something in her loosened. Every time, the house behind them looked less like a lone and more like a place that had been waiting all along. Belonging didn't arrive all at once, wrapped in a single moment on a burned-out doorstep or a ruined homestead. It grew, in flour on the floor and boots by the door, in coffee poured into the same mug each morning, in being missed when you were gone and welcomed when you returned, no explanations demanded beyond the fact that you came back. Raina Holt, who had once believed she did not belong anywhere, learned to belong exactly where she never expected to, on a ranch at the edge of a small western town, with a housekeeper who called her stubborn with pride, with a blacksmith who took off his hat, looked at her every time like she was worth the trouble of choosing, and said, well, you belong with me. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was home.